with your day, and I know some of you have flights that you want to catch so you can get back to business. Couple of quick questions. Mr. Pyne, I'll start with you. I have got to say, if I understood you right, you said the whole purpose of ESPN 360 was to spur the adoption of broadband. That was quite a generous offer, and I thank you all for doing that to spur broadband. I hope that we continue to make certain that we look at how that is available to people that do have broadband. But thank you all for making that the whole purpose of ESPN 360. I know that 50 million users are pleased with that decision that you all carried out. A couple of quick questions, and this is a yes or a no, and I want to just go down the list. Mr. Rutledege, I'm going to start with you. Currently, do you think that the current marketplace needs government intervention at this time? Yes or no?
No.
No. Okay, Mr. Pyne?
No.
No. Okay, Mr. Knorr?
Yes, in some areas.
Yes, in some areas. Okay. Mr. Moore? Yes. Okay. Unequivocal? Yes?
In some areas, I would.
In some areas. Okay, so a qualified yes. Mr. Denson?
Qualified, yes. Narrow legislative act, yes.
Okay. Mr. Thierer?
No, ma'am.
No. All righty. Okay, are you in favor of net neutrality? We have the principles that were released this morning. I call it fairness doctrine for the Internet. Some of you call it net neutrality. Some of you not so neutral. So, Mr. Rutledge, aye or no?
No.
No. Okay. Mr. Pyne?
Yes, to the extent it allows network management to help with piracy.
Okay, so you're a qualified. Oh, so qualified on piracy? Is that what you said?
Right. Traditionally, we have not been proponents of net neutrality, but as it relates to helping
piracy.
with piracy.
Piracy, okay. Mr. Knorr?
Having not seen exactly what came out today, my understanding it would apply narrowly just to distributors, in which case that would be a concern.
Okay, so are you a yay or a nay?
Would be a nay if it's only
Okay.
applying to distributors.
All right. Mr. Moore?
From my understanding, I would support it, yes.
Okay. Mr. Denson?
Nay.
Okay.
No.
No. All righty. Mr. Moore, I appreciated what you had to say about the change in cable rules in the 90s. And I know you're concerned about, you feel like that really impeded some of the independent producers. And I appreciate the charts and the graphs that you brought forward in your testimony today. So let me ask you this. It seems like there were fewer cable channels just a few years ago. And so there were fewer outlets. A lot of our cable programming producers in Tennessee said there were fewer outlets to sell their content and turn that intellectual property and that work product into something that could be monetized. And so I would ask you this. I know you're saying you favor government intervention. Don't we need to be careful about intervening now, given the possibility of unintended consequences, like reducing the incentive for the continued carriage of some of these channels and your concerns over consolidation?
Well, my concern is about the ability to provide content to a variety of forms. And the way that the rules used to be in traditional television was that networks could not actually own or could not program most of their programming from in-house production studios, like, say, Disney owns ABC Studios that then provides most of their content for ABC. However, on the Internet, where we're going now, what we're trying to do is, with Internet neutrality, is to maintain an environment where we have an ability to sell our wares to multiple places and not to have the Internet sort of turn into what's happened in the repeal of the financial interest and syndication rules.
Okay, so the piracy issue is a part of your concern also.
Oh, we're very concerned about piracy as well. I mean, you know, when people pirate...
Mr. Thierer?
Yeah, Congresswoman, with all due respect to Mr. Moore, I believe that the fact is that he's a pretty good example of why the repeal of the financial information syndication rules has made sense, because we have a lot more platforms than ever before for things like Battlestar Galactica to go out over. I watched all 4 seasons on a combination of DVD, Blu-ray, and downloads from my Xbox 360. Never watched it once on television, per se. Number 2, the cost of programming, the cost of producing a show like Battlestar is enormously expensive. And the Sci-Fi Channel itself is an example of a station that did not exist 10, 20 years ago. Universal and others put a lot of money into that to create a platform for folks like Mr. Moore. And then third, you know, this whole question about is it evil to have too much ownership and in-house production, this is a classic make versus buy decision. Newspapers and magazines produce the vast majority of their content in-house. Is that good, bad, evil, in between? I don't think it's any of the things. It's just a business choice. Sometimes it makes a great deal of sense because you're sharing the risk and the rewards of the enormous expense associated with the production of television.
I appreciate that, and I thank you all for your answer. Mr. Pyne, I picked on you at first. I'm going to come back to you and let you answer your question. Go ahead.
I just wanted to make one further point in terms of broadcast networks and where they get programming from. This year, ABC, in its own studio, developed 26 pilots at great expense. And of the 11 new shows that are on ABC this fall, only 3 of those 26 will actually be appear. The other 8 are from other studios. So it's, I mean, we try, all of the broadcast networks and all the cable networks try to do the best to get the best programming and content on the air.
Okay, great. I have 2 questions I will submit. Mr. Rutledge, one to you. I want to ask you an MVPD question that I'll submit to you for writing. And Mr. Denson, I'm going to come back to you because I want to go back to this exclusivity issue with you and how you view that differently from sports networks to handset exclusivity. So with that, I thank you all very much, and I yield my time.
Thank you very much, Ms. Blackburn. The gentleman from Pennsylvania, Mr. Doyle, is recognized for 7 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I live in Pittsburgh, where we have Division I college sports, the defending Super Bowl champions, the Stanley Cup champions. I'm sorry Mr. Stupak isn't here because he's a Red Wings fan. In Pittsburgh, we love our sports, but I'm also sympathetic to my constituents that want to have their broadband at an affordable price. Now, as I understand it, for any of the ISP's customers to have access to ESPN 360, all of them have to pay for it. And that strikes me in some ways as fundamentally unfair. I've read that some independent ISPs were quoted as much as 79 cents per subscriber per month for ESPN 360. Even if only one subscriber watched it, all of them would have to pay for it. Now, Mr. Knorr, you're a small cable person. Do you believe that all your broadband customers want and will watch ESPN 360?
No, I mean, I think fundamentally, I know for a fact, and we're in Lawrence, Kansas, is a huge sports market. We have the Jayhawks, we have the Chiefs, although that's down this year. But we know our customers aren't all sports fans, and we think the ones that are, 360 is a great product. But for the ones that aren't, as I said in my testimony, if you're just the only reason you're getting your internet access because you lost your job and you have to find a new one, having that internet access be more expensive just for those that want that product, again, we don't think that's right.
Yeah, I mean, it seems to me if they're going to quote 79 cents per month per subscriber that wants to watch it, that seems like a perfectly reasonable thing to do. But if you're going to charge the ISP and people start to try to out-exclusive one another, you know, if this is this business model, what happens when we have a dozen more ESPN 360 business models? What happens to broadband prices for the average consumer when they're forced to pay, you know, whether they're watching this or not, and if everybody would adopt that kind of a model, what would happen to pricing? And Mr. Pyne, I'll let you maybe discuss that.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, but we'll reaffirm now, for all the research and work that we have done on ESPN 360, no one has told us they're raising prices to consumer because of launching ESPN 360. And in fact, when the broadband margins that operators or ISPs are making can be up to 70%. It varies by market for sure, but it is certainly well worth their while to get another subscriber, and if ESPN 360 can help with that, that's fantastic. And I mean, I don't.
You're saying,
in Pittsburgh, I will say
you're saying they're not passing that cost on. They're absorbing that cost because they want the ESPN 360.
To be clear, we don't. We don't tell our distributors how they need to manage their retail pricing. Just as we don't tell people who carry ESPN how to manage the retail pricing. That's between them and the consumer. But we're offering a business proposition to ISPs to make them valuable in their marketplace, and it is actually up to them what they want to do with it.
But,
I mean, in the New York market,
wouldn't you concede if there were a half a dozen other business ventures like your own that adopted that same model, that were attractive content, and the ISPs had to pay for it for every subscriber they had, regardless of whether every subscriber watched it or not? It's at some point they have to pass that cost on to their, especially the small. I mean, what does it do to a small cable operator, Mr. Knorr, that's having to pay 80 cents per person per subscriber per month?
Well, I mean, it has two impacts. I mean, we can absorb it, but that reduces the capital we have available to launch things like DOCSIS 3.0 and more advanced broadband services, or we can pass it along to our customers, which raises the price of the service. And if everybody's raising the price of the service, I mean, that's fine. It doesn't put me at a competitive disadvantage if everybody carries ESPN 360, but it certainly doesn't do anything to make broadband more affordable. One of the key concerns that we have is what's been stated several times by Mr. Pyne today, is that it is a negotiation with the operator. It is up to the operator to decide whether or not they want to take the deal. That's one of our concerns, is we're replicating one of the chief concerns of the cable business model onto the internet, and that's that distributors will decide what customers can access. You know, I can choose to say, no, I'm not going to do a deal, and my customers can't get it, or I can choose to do a deal and all my customers have to pay for it. When in the age of the internet, the great promise of the internet was that customers would have control. Customers would be able to make choices more than ever before, and this model would take away that great promise of the internet.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Knorr. I want to ask Mr. Denson a question too, and it's a different question. Mr. Denson, we all agree that competition is good for consumers. FiOS is rolling out in my district, and I understand why Verizon wants popular programming in HD. I mean, that kind of programming certainly makes for a compelling package. So seems here that Verizon supports government intervention for competitors to have access to programming that incumbents own, saying that it will help competition. But if my memory serves me correct, I've sat in this committee and watched Verizon oppose the CLEC industry from line sharing. You've opposed government intervention to help small wireless carriers struggling because big wireless carriers have lengthy handset exclusivity contracts. And yesterday, your CEO reiterated Verizon's opposition to net neutrality rules that would ensure that companies offering competing services won't be blocked. So those are all exclusivities that Verizon likes. What makes this exclusivity that you want different?
Well, I think the most important part of this exclusivity is that it benefits the consumers and it provides the consumers with the maximum amount of choice. If we don't provide, it's not a choice for a consumer. You're from Pittsburgh, and if you could not watch the Pittsburgh Pirates or the Penguins in high definition,
I could probably go without watching the Pirates.
Okay. So let's take those. The
Steelers might have been a better
Stanley
pick.
Cup champion Pittsburgh Penguins. If you could not get the Penguins in HD, you might not choose Verizon, even though we'll have a wealth of services and content and innovations and applications that would make us, all told, a superior service for consumer choice. The promise that we like to make is that every customer should want to consider and be in a position to consider FiOS, and that's what's being defeated if we don't have access to that highly valuable, unique regional sports network programming.
Thank you. I see my time's up, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Doyle. The gentleman from Georgia, Mr. Deal, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Pyne, I think we've established a couple of things, and everything seems to revolve around sports, it seems. The ESPN 360 is not available on a subscriber basis over the Internet to individuals. That's what you said, I believe. It is only available if an Internet provider chooses to participate with you. And I assume that when you negotiate with that ISP that it is on a per customer basis which your fee is based. Would that be a logical assumption?
Per ISP customer? Yes, that is correct.
Okay. But that so far you don't think anybody's passing that cost on to their customers?
Correct.
They're absorbing it. It's interesting that it appears that ESPN 360 is being sold to potential ISP providers on the basis that it gives them a competitive advantage over perhaps their competition. But on the television side, it appears ESPN doesn't seem to follow that same model because as under current statutes, a cable operator or a satellite provider cannot simply enhance their offerings in a package that would include niche tiers or on a per-channel basis in order to gain competitive advantage over their competition. Why is it that it works in one environment as a free market opportunity, but in the other environment it is not considered to be that?
I'm not sure if I understand. What do you mean by in the other environment?
Well, let's just take the television environment in terms of cable operators cannot simply just pick and choose their packages they're required to take.
I don't think that's true. No, if people would like ESPN, they don't have to take any other ESPN, Disney, or even ABC service. We've been, in fact, I have affidavits that I've submitted that if you want, there are two most popular services, Disney Channel and ESPN. There is absolutely nothing else a cable operator, telco, or satellite provider needs to take. We make it available on that basis.
Mr. Knorr, does that reconcile with what you're...
And in fact, just to add, I mean, we have several hundred situations where people just take ESPN around this country.
Mr. Knorr?
I mean, to my knowledge, I mean, there's significant financial incentives to take the bundle of services that ESPN offers on the video side. And so I believe that most operators choose to take that route. Fundamentally, whether it's the internet side and ESPN 360 or on the programming side, and this is true for most of the top programmers, there's very little options in how we can package our that content to our customers.
Now, with regard to all of this, let me preface what I'm about to ask by saying I believe that negotiations are private in private business. They should remain private. However, we are operating in somewhat of a public domain. Mr. Moore alluded to some of the problem here. Do you think that the FCC should have some availability to know what the negotiations are among providers and carriers in terms of determining if, in fact, the rules, general rules of fairness are being followed, even though the public may not have access to that, even though individual subscribers may not know what a per channel cost is being allocated to them on? Is there reason to say that that this is a type of transparency at the FCC that we currently don't have, but we should be encouraging? Mr. Moore, I'll start with you since that's sort of in an area you've alluded to.
I think generally speaking, transparency is a good thing when we're dealing with the public airways, when we're dealing with content providers and so on. I don't know that I can speak to that specific example of whether the FCC should have the authority to look into all the details of these kind of negotiations. I think I'd want to probably confer with the Writers Guild and sort of study that before I gave you a definitive answer.
Okay. I'll try to, yes, Mr. Thierer.
Congressman Deal, I think you really hit the nail on the head when you said first and foremost that sports is really what's the thorn in our side here on so many of these issues, right? But I hope the committee doesn't lose sight of the fact that that's a very, very unique problem and that we don't have this problem in most other types of content. Second of all, to the extent it is a problem, I think we need to understand that some of these deals might be, the role of the FCC could be more of a, to rip a pages from baseball, if you will, could be baseball-style arbitration. Bring parties together, ask them to sit at a table, hammer out a deal and then maybe set a clock and set some sort of an independent person or group together there as an arbitrator to help them hammer out that deal if they don't reach it at the end of a certain timetable. But one final point, let's not lose sight of the fact that exclusivity also has competitive benefits. Many of these regional sports networks would have never existed without a fair degree of exclusivity. And I do wonder, would a national service like DirecTV have the legs it does today without exclusivity for the Sunday ticket? It really does help create new forms of entertainment and new platforms that weren't there before. These things did not exist 10, 15 years ago. Are new problems created because of that? Yeah, it's true, especially about sports. But that's, again, I think, a unique situation.
Well, I would suggest it's broader than that, that the packaging and bundling is a much broader issue that goes far beyond just sports programming. But my time is up. I will yield back.
Thank you, Mr. Deal. The gentleman from Vermont, Mr. Welch, is recognized.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
A total of 7 minutes.
Oh, thank you very much. Mr. Rutledge, your company owns the sports teams and does the distribution and broadcast. Is that correct?
Cablevision owns the Knicks and Rangers.
Right. So if I'm in New York and I want to watch the Knicks and Rangers, I have to get it through you?
No.
How does that work?
No, it works this way. There are, in the service footprint that Cablevision serves, we're a cable TV company as well, there are 4 providers of Knicks and Rangers and all the other sports services that are sold in the market. Verizon, for instance, has access to every Knicks and Rangers game.
Right, but if I want to get it in HD, I have to get it from you?
Yes, and they don't have it in the
so
HD.
So why won't you allow Verizon or others to get it in HD?
I do allow others, but I want to have a competitive differentiation against Verizon so that I can be more successful.
So that's good for you, but not necessarily for the consumer.
Well, it is good for the consumer to have companies that create products that are new and innovative. We invested and created this high-definition regional sports programming service more than 10 years ago. And we invested and created it, distributed it.
All right, I get it.
And we're trying to get a return to it.
All right. Mr. Pyne, I just want to make sure I understood this. You were asked about your position on net neutrality. What I thought I heard you say, and I just want to confirm this, is that you want to deal with the piracy question because that's your product. But if that is dealt with, Disney favors net neutrality or opposes it? I just want some clarification on that.
I mean, traditionally, we have not been proponents of net neutrality. We haven't really been as part of the discussion. But we do support it to allow ISPs to manage their networks, particularly around piracy.
I'm not sure I understand you. So you have a piracy issue, but dealing with that.
Piracy is to make sure that.
I understand what that is. You've got to protect your product. You invested in it, and people are stealing it. And I have some sympathy for that. But dealing with that, are you saying yes or no that you are for net neutrality, as you were asked by Congresswoman Blackburn?
I think we support it to the extent we believe ISP should have the ability to manage their networks.
Okay. I come from Vermont, where we have a lot of small rural carriers. Waitsfield, Champlain Valley Telecom probably has, I don't know, fewer than 1,000 folks, and it's very, very tough for them to bring cable programming and internet services to those rural markets that aren't served by the larger cable companies. Tough markets to serve. There's a lot of difficulty in getting affordable terms for programming services that make that business even more difficult. And I heard some conversation back and forth really between Mr. Pyne and Mr. Knorr, and I want each of you to comment on what the obstacles are, and perhaps you too, Mr. Moore, as well. But Mr. Knorr, why don't we start with you? What are some of the impediments that have to be addressed in order to provide fair access to the consumer?
Well, I think especially when it comes to retransmission consent, I think some type of balancing of the equation, that's one thing that was brought up in testimony by ESPN is we have a buying cooperative, but that buying cooperative is for national content. It does not and cannot scale to market-by-market broadcasters to negotiate those agreements.
And I think what you said in your testimony, if I remember, is that you got a take it or leave it type of
correct
document that I guess is faxed to you or submitted.
Yeah, for the smaller operators, yeah, often it is a fax document or just a letter that comes in the mail. with the election notice that says, here's the terms. And so I think injecting some fairness, some transparency, giving us the ability that other DBS operators have to tier broadcasters would be one negotiating element. And then also for many small broadcasters are outside the exclusion zone that broadcasters have. And if they had the right to pick neighboring channels as well, I think that would
Let me go to Mr. Pyne.
Competition.
Just before, I want to add something to you. You were talking about the ESPN 360 and that you don't get involved in how that is priced by the people you sell it to. But bottom line is if the buyers can't absorb cost indefinitely without passing that on, obviously. So isn't there down the road a problem that ultimately will result in higher cost to the consumers in order to have access to this with the approach that Disney is taking on this?
Sorry. I don't believe so for the following reason, is that as broadband is still not fully penetrated in the United States. And just a point is because an ISP has a very strong programming service like ESPN 360 and it gets additional subscribers, it actually will get more margin or profit margin to help, in fact, reduce its overall.
So if I understand what you're saying, it helps on the build-out. But I think Mr. Doyle had a fair question. And if he wants that service and is willing to pay 79 cents for it or $7.90 and I don't want it, as a consumer, my preference is to let Doyle pay and not me help him pay. Mr. Knorr?
Well, I mean, I'd like to answer that directly. I mean, we have, in our community, we have very high broadband adoption. I think it might be as high as 80%. Fundamentally, I don't think there's any operator, and we have several right here, that feel that the only impediment to broadband adoption is, at this point, price sensitivity. I don't think there's customers out there that are requiring incentive to get onto the Internet. I mean, everybody's getting onto the Internet. I mean, the Internet has been growing exponentially.
I only have another minute. I want to go to Mr. Moore. I happen to be somebody who thinks that the programming that we had before was an awful lot better than the programming we're having now. And you mentioned a number of things in your very good testimony. But tying and bundling, you mentioned, it was a bit of a problem. And I wonder if you can elaborate on that.
Well, what's happening is that, as you're aware, in bundling, the operators are given, here's a bundle of programs that channels that you have to take, take it or leave it, because you can't just a la carte differentiate them out. And what we've discovered is happening is that some of those channels are being occupied by essentially just filler. There are weather maps with LaCroix going across the bottom. There are subgenres of music videos in some cases. And these channels basically have national viewership in the tens of thousands, and a viable cable operation needs cable channel needs around 200,000 just to make it sort of a going concern. So when you look at what they're actually providing and the numbers of people that are actually watching this and the money that they're making, it's clear that they're not actually a business opportunity. They're not actually being innovative. They're simply squatting on the space and keeping other people off the dial.
Okay, thank you. I think my time is up, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Welch. The gentleman from Massachusetts, Mr. Markey, is recognized for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, very much. Mr. Denson, the program access rules specifically are designed to prohibit discrimination, and they provide for a case-by-case enforcement regime to stop any such discrimination. Moreover, Verizon supported extending the program access rules when they were scheduled to expire, asserting that non-discrimination rules were needed. And so for me, as I listen to this discussion, and I can understand why Verizon would vigorously oppose any efforts to deny it access to programming, particularly sports programming, although my concern for people's access to Yankee games would only be received with crocodile tears, but the principle is the same, okay, for any community in America for their sports teams. So I understand that debate, but the principle of non-discrimination is extremely important to me and to our economy. So what I would ask you to do is square that up then with the position that Verizon is taking on the question of non-discrimination in the net neutrality bill and the net neutrality rulemaking, because I kind of feel that there should be a presumption that if you're going to support non-discrimination over here because it's good for the company, that the same kind of principle will then be adopted when it comes to other things that are unrelated to that issue, but the principle is the same. So could you talk about how you square that circle internally in terms of your views on non-discrimination?
Yes, to be sure, that area is outside of my area of expertise. I'm video content across multiple platforms. I program all of the platforms at Verizon, broadband, wireless, and the FiOS service, but I am not involved in our net neutrality. However, what I would say is that for us, it's about the competition is for benefit, direct benefit to the customer. And that our position on the regional sports network is that it actually precludes a customer from making a choice that they might otherwise want to make, or just consider another provider that they might otherwise want to.
No, I appreciate that, but you can understand how someone who sat on this committee for 33 years and understands that there are protections on the books for AT&T lobbied me for 10 years to kind of mandate that they be allowed at reasonable cost to deliver long-distance service into the network. And they begged me, and I work with them to give that to AT&T and in their access to the local loop so that they could provide, as a long-distance company, more competition to Verizon and to its other companies, and so when AT&T and Verizon get together and start to, because they were bitter enemies, then we're in a new era. It's kind of like just got to adjust to this changing terrain, and now they're aligned against allowing for this open internet. But Mr. Moore, next to you, he supports net neutrality. Mr. Pyne says that he could be open-minded to it as long as illegal activity, as long as piracy is not allowed. And in my bill, and I don't think there's any of us who have ever advocated that illegal activity should be condoned. In fact, it should be punished to the full extent of the law. And you're here, Mr. Denson, kind of with a portfolio that does not give you authority for fear of jeopardizing your job to speak on net neutrality. Or can you speak on net neutrality at all?
I cannot, and I think the best way that I can portray it here in terms of what I do and in my testimony today is that the Red Sox and the Bruins and the Celtics are each owned by different entities, and if you had to choose between or among cable providers or satellite providers because each one had an exclusive right on one of those particular teams, that might be an unfair choice. You might not want to have to make your determination based upon that. So that's what I'm testifying on today.
No, and I appreciate that, Mr. Denson. And back in 1992, when the chairman and I were working on the programming access rules, we were thinking about how do we get HBO and ESPN, I think there was only one ESPN then, and other cable programs over to the satellite dish industry because I think more than any reason because the chairman was getting tired of having 8-foot-sized dishes trying to get zoning variances all over his district. So if we could get that programming access, maybe we could get an 18-inch dish, and we have 30 million people with it. And it kind of evolved to this question now that you're talking about, which is the Yankee question or, the Bruins question, whatever it is, which is just kind of a pluperfect form of that same question, that HBO, ESPN question back then. You just have to keep, how far do you take non-discrimination? How far do you, do you take it? But you're advocating for kind of an outer limit definition here. And all I'm saying is that the same thing is true in net neutrality. Okay? What we're trying to do, I would say, to your company through you, although it's not your responsibility, that what we're trying to do is to protect those startups, those Steve Jobs and Sergey Brins and Larry Pages of today who are in the garage and they've got a gadget or they got an application that they would want to get out there. They got some ideas, and that's where the revolutions come from. and that we're just trying to make sure that that marketplace doesn't stultify. That is, we shouldn't have a world where you innovate by permission. Okay, you should be able to innovate. You shouldn't be able to be stultified, and that's the point that I would make. I thank you, Mr. Denson, for being here. I thank all the rest of you as well. I thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much, Mr. Markey.
Thank you.
The gentleman from Florida, Mr. Stearns, you've asked questions, I think. I'm going to ask unanimous consent that we put two documents in the record for today's hearing. One is a letter from Wealth TV. The other is a response from Comcast to the letter from Wealth TV. And without objection, these items shall be admitted to the record. I want to say thank you to our witnesses this morning, and I will say again that this hearing, from my perspective, is entirely informational. We wanted to get the benefit of your views on the current state of competition in the video marketplace. You have provided that well. We are well informed on the subject, thanks to you. And I think some additional questions are going to be submitted to you. Ms. Blackburn indicated her intention to submit questions to at least two of the witnesses. When they're received, please submit them back to us promptly. We'll hold this record open for about a 2-week period in order to receive your responses. So with the committee's thanks to our witnesses this morning, this hearing stands adjourned.